Ever wondered what could get you instantly erased from history? Not metaphorically. Literally, your name, your image, your entire existence chiseled off every wall, every monument, every memory of Egypt wiped away like you never existed. That's not hyperbole. That's what happened when you offended a pharaoh, and it didn't take much. You didn't have to stab anyone, start a rebellion, or try to overthrow the throne. Sometimes, you could lose everything for something as small as sneezing in the wrong direction during a royal ceremony. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a kingdom, it was a theater. Every grain of sand, every sound, every color had a script. And at the center of that stage was one person who wasn't just a ruler, but a living god. The pharaoh wasn't seen as a man doing divine work. He was divine. His breath kept the Nile flowing, his heartbeat kept the sun rising, and his words could bend reality. So, when you offended him, you weren't just insulting a man, you were destabilizing the universe. Let's say you worked in the palace. You woke up before sunrise, bathed, shaved every hair off your body, because body hair was seen as filth, and dressed in spotless linen. You couldn't walk into the royal court smelling of anything less than perfection. Perfumes made from lotus and frankincense were mandatory. One wrong odor? That wasn't just impolite, that was sacrilege. Ancient Egyptians believed that unpleasant smells attracted chaos, and chaos was the enemy of order, the foundation of the pharaoh's entire cosmic authority. So yes, even body odor could be interpreted as rebellion. And the eyes, oh, you had to watch the eyes. You never looked directly at the pharaoh unless commanded. His gaze wasn't for equals. Looking straight at him without permission could be read as a challenge, like telling the sun it was shining too bright. Court officials were trained to look down, bow low, and speak in rehearsed formulas that emphasized their insignificance. Imagine working for a boss so powerful that saying "good morning" the wrong way could be a death sentence. But the most dangerous mistake? Misusing his name. To the Egyptians, a name wasn't just a label, it was a fragment of the soul. Saying it wrong, writing it wrong, or even placing it in the wrong order on a monument could be seen as spiritual sabotage. Scribes had to learn to carve royal names perfectly inside an oval shape called a cartouche. That wasn't decorative, it was protection. The cartouche symbolized the rope that encircled and preserved the pharaoh's soul for eternity. Slip up while carving it, and you weren't just making a typo, you were attacking the king's immortality. And the punishment for that kind of error wasn't a write-up from HR, it was torture, exile, or erasure. But here's where things get truly insane. Erasure in Egypt was worse than death. Death was expected. It was part of the cycle. But being erased meant your soul couldn't reach the afterlife. No name, no offerings, no remembrance, no eternity. This punishment was called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The Egyptians didn't invent it, but they perfected it. Offend a pharaoh badly enough, and generations later, people wouldn't even know you existed. That's what happened to Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who dared to change Egypt's religion. After his death, his successors wiped out every trace of him, statues smashed, names carved out, temples dismantled. For almost 3,000 years, history forgot him. Until archaeologists rediscovered his ruins in the 19th century, he was literally a ghost civilization had deleted. The irony? Most people who offended a pharaoh never meant to. Some were victims of gossip, others just got caught in the wrong political wind. Palace life was a minefield of etiquette. Your posture, your tone, the way you carried an offering, all could be misinterpreted. If the pharaoh raised an eyebrow, everyone froze. The wrong word at the wrong time could be taken as disrespect, and ancient Egyptian court culture thrived on paranoia. Ministers flattered, priests schemed, and guards eavesdropped, all terrified that one misplaced syllable might brand them as traitors. Even art had rules. You couldn't depict the pharaoh casually. Artists followed sacred proportions called the canon of form. The king's body had to be drawn with perfect symmetry, broad shoulders, narrow hips, idealized muscles. If you made the pharaoh look too human, that was blasphemy. When artists sculpted statues, they performed rituals before touching the stone, cleansing themselves with water from the Nile. Each chisel strike was accompanied by whispered prayers, because to carve incorrectly was to offend the divine form itself. Imagine painting someone's portrait knowing that if you messed up the nose, you might lose your own. But the stupidest thing, the absolute stupidest thing you could do to offend a pharaoh, speak as though he wasn't eternal. The worst possible insult wasn't calling him cruel or corrupt, it was even hinting that he might die. The Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the principle of balance and cosmic order. The pharaoh's existence maintained that order, suggesting that he was mortal, that someday his rule would end, was the spiritual equivalent of predicting the end of the world. Scribes, priests, and poets all spoke of him as if he would live forever. In inscriptions, they didn't say, "when the pharaoh dies." They said, "when he ascends to the stars." Euphemisms were law. A careless phrase about death could be seen as planting chaos into the universe. There's a surviving letter from an official under Ramesses II, the same pharaoh who probably inspired the story of Exodus, where the writer apologizes for using a phrase that might imply the king could age. He wasn't punished, but his apology reads like a confession before execution. The anxiety bleeds through the papyrus. This was a world where words carried weight divine, dangerous weight. And yet, despite all the fear and ceremony, pharaohs themselves were painfully human. They got sick, they argued, they made mistakes. Some even mocked their subjects in private. But publicly, that divine image had to remain flawless. It was a carefully curated illusion, held together by the silence and obedience of everyone beneath them, which meant that offending the pharaoh wasn't just about insulting a person, it was breaking the spell that kept society functioning. One slip, one misstep, one unintentional gesture, and the entire illusion cracked. And when that happened, the punishment wasn't about justice, it was about restoration, restoring the order you had disturbed. The Egyptians called it Heka, divine magic, the power that sustained the cosmos. And when you broke Heka, you weren't just punished, you were corrected. Publicly, violently, and symbolically. And here's where things take a darker turn, because some pharaohs used that idea of correction to justify almost anything. Some pharaohs were masters of symbolic punishment. When someone offended the crown, the goal wasn't just to hurt them, it was to make their suffering mean something. Everything in Egypt had to tell a story, even revenge. Let's say you were a noble accused of disrespect, you wouldn't just be executed. That would be too simple. Instead, you might be forced to watch as sculptors chipped away your name from your family tomb. Every letter gone meant another piece of your soul cut loose from eternity. When the artisans were done, your sarcophagus became a corpse without an identity, your afterlife revoked by decree. It was the spiritual equivalent of deleting your save file before the end game. And if you'd really offended the pharaoh, say, by questioning his divinity or mocking one of his sacred rituals, you might be buried face down, head severed from the body, or worse, buried under a different name. To the Egyptian mind, that wasn't just execution, that was chaos being folded back into order. Your death became a ritual reset button. There's an ancient record from the reign of Pepi II, who ruled during the Old Kingdom, describing a man who accidentally sat in the pharaoh's presence before being invited. One innocent gesture, sitting too early, was interpreted as an act of arrogance. The man wasn't killed. Instead, he was removed from the light. The inscription doesn't specify what that meant, but Egyptian historians believe it referred to ritual blindness, the symbolic stripping of divine vision. He wasn't allowed to see the sun because he had looked upon God without permission. But the most disturbing punishments were the quiet ones, the ones history almost forgot. In Thebes, archaeologists found fragments of a wall where names were chiseled out, one after another, like an accountant's ledger of vanished people. Entire family lines erased for minor court slights. The punishment extended to their descendants. 2. No positions in government, no mention in temple prayers, no tomb offerings. In a culture where immortality depended on remembrance, that was annihilation through silence. And here's the cruel genius behind it. The pharaoh didn't even have to order it directly. The mere possibility of offending him made people preemptively erase each other. Officials destroyed records, priests censored texts, and artists edited statues before anyone could accuse them of disrespect. It was a self-cleaning dictatorship. The system maintained itself through fear of the unspoken. Still, Egyptians were nothing if not practical. They understood politics. Offending the pharaoh wasn't always about personal disrespect. Sometimes it was about stepping on the wrong toes in the wrong faction. The royal court was a maze of priests, scribes, generals, and royal relatives, all fighting for proximity to divine favor. Pharaohs were gods, yes, but gods surrounded by humans with very human ambitions. One whispered rumor could turn loyalty into treason. There's a story from the Middle Kingdom about an official named Intef, who oversaw granaries during a time of drought. The people loved him. He distributed food fairly and kept order. But he made one mistake. He referred to the pharaoh in a speech as the protector of Egypt instead of the living god, a single missing title. Within a month, Intef was arrested for disrespecting divinity. His tomb was stripped of inscriptions, his statues recarved into generic figures. Even the hieroglyph for life beside his name was cut away because only the pharaoh was life. Offending a pharaoh didn't always end with destruction, though. Sometimes it ended in conversion. If you were valuable enough, a high priest, a military commander, a talented scribe, you could beg for forgiveness through ritual humiliation. One of the most infamous was the prostration of the sands. The offender would strip naked and crawl across the palace courtyard, forehead pressed into the dirt, repeating the phrase, "I have offended the sun, may I be restored to light." The pharaoh would watch in silence, sometimes for hours, before granting or denying mercy. The symbolism was obvious. You had to return to dust before you could be reborn through royal grace. One record from the reign of Horemheb describes a priest who performed this ritual after being accused of misquoting a sacred hymn. His plea was accepted, but he was never allowed to speak in temple ceremonies again. His voice had symbolically polluted the divine order, so he was condemned to eternal silence, a living reminder of what happens when words go wrong. And then there were the architects. Working for a pharaoh was both the greatest honor and the fastest way to die horribly. A pyramid or temple wasn't just a monument, it was a vessel for the pharaoh's soul. Every measurement, every alignment, every brick carried divine significance. If your construction went wrong, it wasn't bad engineering, it was blasphemy. Legends say that after the completion of certain royal tombs, workers who had seen the secret chambers were sealed inside to serve the pharaoh in death. While that's likely exaggerated, as records from Deir el-Medina, the workers' village near the Valley of the Kings, do confirm that craftsmen could be executed for revealing the design of the sacred place. The absurdity of it all was that Egypt's greatest builders lived in constant fear of the very tombs they were creating. One chipped stone could mean eternal disgrace. And yet, they built monuments so perfect that we're still trying to figure out how. Maybe fear really is a powerful motivator, though it's safer to call it devotion if you want to keep your head. Even foreign diplomats weren't safe. The pharaoh was lord of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, but he also styled himself as the ruler of all creation. Visiting envoys had to perform elaborate submission rituals. One tablet from the reign of Amenhotep III records a diplomat from Babylon who failed to bow low enough during an audience. He explained that in his homeland, only gods received such gestures. The Egyptian court took that as a compliment, but Amenhotep didn't. The record says the envoy was sent to labor beneath the stone, a poetic way of saying he died quarrying limestone for temples. Lesson learned: when visiting a living god, Aim your respect low, very low. There's something eerily modern about this world of fragile divinity. A society built on unspoken rules, where words could destroy you, and where reverence was measured by fear of misunderstanding. But in Egypt, this wasn't politics, it was cosmology. The universe was believed to rest on ma'at, balance, truth, harmony. To offend the pharaoh was to break that balance. To question him was to question reality itself. It's easy to look back now and laugh at the absurdity of it all, the rigid etiquette, the fear of sneezing wrong, the obsessive ritual around every gesture, but it worked. Egypt lasted longer than almost any civilization in history. The pyramids were already ancient when Rome was born. The temples outlived empires. And the idea that order depends on obedience, that the universe itself can collapse under disrespect, that's a belief that still echoes today, whether we realize it or not. But for all their rules, for all their ceremony, even the pharaohs couldn't control the one thing they feared most time. Because eventually, every divine ruler turned to dust, and that's where the story of offense took its most poetic twist. When a pharaoh died, his ego didn't. It was preserved, perfumed, and wrapped in linen so fine it shimmered like glass. The funeral wasn't an ending, it was an apotheosis. He wasn't dead. He was reborn in the field of reeds, Egypt's version of paradise, an eternal Egypt where the Nile never flooded too high and the bread never burned. But getting there required protection, because even in death, a pharaoh could still be offended. You've probably heard of the curse of the pharaohs. It wasn't just a Hollywood invention. The Egyptians genuinely believed that disturbing a king's tomb or even mishandling the objects inside was a cosmic offense. Every object buried with the ruler was charged with Heka, the same divine force that animated the universe. Disturbing it didn't just break into a tomb, it broke the spiritual architecture of eternity. And they took that seriously. Inside royal tombs, the walls weren't just decorated for beauty, they were armed. Inscriptions doubled as magical security systems. Some warned, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Others didn't bother with poetry. They promised that violators would have their hearts devoured by Amit, the crocodile-lion-hippopotamus hybrid that punished the damned. The most chilling ones invoked personal torment, blindness, madness, or losing one's name, forever the ultimate Egyptian horror. And here's the wild part. Some of those curses weren't just mystical threats, they were biological. Archaeologists now believe that mold, spores, bacteria, and toxic gases sealed inside tombs for millennia caused respiratory illnesses and mysterious deaths among early excavators. The curse wasn't magic, it was microbiology with an excellent PR department. Still, to the ancient Egyptians, that would have just proven the point. The king's spirit was still defending itself. But curses were only one layer. The deeper magic was in the tomb design itself. Every chamber, every corridor, was a maze of meaning. The layout mirrored the journey of the sun through the underworld light, descending into darkness, chaos conquered by rebirth. The walls were covered with spells from the Book of the Dead, a manual for the soul to navigate the afterlife. If you damaged even a single hieroglyph, you weren't just vandalizing art, you were deleting a line from the pharaoh's resurrection code. And yes, people still dared to. Tomb robbers existed in every era. But in ancient Egypt, robbing a pharaoh's tomb was like robbing a god, an act that offended the dead and the living alike. The punishments were brutal. One papyrus from the reign of Ramesses IX describes the trial of men caught looting royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The record lists confessions under torture, names of families erased, and, at the end, a chilling phrase: their punishment was carried out. No details given because describing it was considered unholy. But not all tomb violations were done for greed. Some were political. Imagine a new dynasty rising to power. How do you erase your rivals? You desecrate their afterlife. Pharaohs often ordered the names of predecessors or enemies scratched out from monuments, not just as spite, but as spiritual assassination. The ancient Egyptians truly believed that if your name disappeared, your soul would vanish too. To insult a dead king wasn't grave robbing, it was divine warfare. Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's greatest rulers, and a woman who dared to call herself king, was nearly erased this way. Years after her death, her successor, Thutmose III, had her images defaced and her cartouches removed from temples. For centuries, no one even knew she had existed. Her statues were buried under rubble, her name missing from king lists. That was how you killed a pharaoh twice, once in body, once in memory. Even more ironic was what happened to Akhenaten. He had tried to rewrite religion, replacing Egypt's entire pantheon with one god, Aten, the sun disk. For that, his successors called him a heretic and obliterated his legacy. They even built new temples over his ruins, as if to bury his ideas beneath literal stone. Offending a pharaoh could destroy you. But being a pharaoh who offended the gods, that could erase you from civilization itself. And yet, in their obsession with eternity, Egypt's rulers left behind something almost poetic, a record of how terrified they were of being forgotten. Tomb after tomb, monument after monument, all built for one purpose: to keep being remembered. The Great Pyramid wasn't just an architectural marvel, it was the loudest "Don't forget me" ever built. The hieroglyphs inside weren't random decorations, they were insurance policies against cosmic neglect. That fear of erasure shaped everything. Even the smallest offering bowls and amulets bore inscriptions like, "May the Ka of the king live forever." People repeated those phrases, not just out of duty but self-preservation. Remembering the pharaoh kept the world stable, forgetting him could unravel it. You didn't just offend a ruler by neglecting him, you risked offending the universe itself. But here's where the story takes a strange twist. The same civilization that punished disrespect toward the pharaoh also made fun of him quietly, cleverly, and at great risk. Hidden in private tombs and papyrus scraps are drawings called satirical papyri. They're ancient Egyptian cartoons, animals behaving like humans, priests shown as monkeys, mice riding chariots like kings. These were jokes, but dangerous ones. A papyrus showing a lion being served by monkeys? To us, it's cute. To an ancient Egyptian, it was subversive art, hinting that the powerful were ruled by fools. One such drawing, found near Deir el-Medina, shows a cat dressed as a noblewoman playing a harp for a goose, wearing a crown, the goose likely symbolizing the god Geb, associated with kingship. In a society that worshipped order, that was chaos disguised as comedy. Whoever drew it had to hide it in a worker's tomb, probably never expecting it to survive. Thousands of years later, we're still laughing at a joke that could have gotten its artist executed. And that's what makes Egypt so fascinating. Beneath all the gold, the rituals, and the rigid obedience, there were people human, clever, rebellious in whispers. They lived in a world where the stupidest thing you could do to offend a pharaoh was forget your place in the divine order. But they still found ways to wink at the absurdity of it. Because deep down, even they knew the truth. No matter how divine a pharaoh claimed to be, no one rules forever. Sand buries everything, names fade, statues crack, and time, patient and silent, erases what even chisels could not. But before that final erasure came, the pharaohs went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that offending them even by accident would have consequences that reached beyond death. Because if you couldn't punish your enemies in life, why not curse them from eternity? After death, the pharaoh didn't just rest, he ruled from the other side. Every tomb, every ritual, every spell was a continuation of authority. The living world bowed to the living pharaoh. The dead world bowed to the eternal one, which meant that offending a dead pharaoh could be just as dangerous as offending a living one, maybe even worse. Because living kings could be reasoned with, dead ones had all the time in the world. When archaeologists entered the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, they found entire corridors covered in spells designed to annihilate intruders. One wall shows a monstrous serpent named Apophis being hacked apart by divine blades. In Egyptian belief, that serpent represented chaos, the enemy of the sun god Ra. But to anyone entering that tomb uninvited, the message was obvious. You are Apophis now. You are the chaos being cut down for daring to enter sacred space. The Egyptians didn't rely only on magic words. They used psychology long before anyone named it. Tomb entrances were built at angles that forced visitors to stoop, a physical reminder of submission. Corridors twisted in deliberate confusion, symbolizing the perilous path to the afterlife. Even the colors on the walls were chosen to unsettle. Deep reds for danger, blacks for the underworld, golds for divine light. The whole design whispered, "You shouldn't be here." It worked. Even centuries later, when grave robbers dared to break in, many abandoned their looting halfway, convinced the tombs were alive. One ancient note found in a looter's stash reads simply, "We could not go on. The god's breath was upon us." Scholars think that might refer to a toxic gas pocket. The robbers probably thought it was Seti himself. But the fear didn't end with tomb robbers. Pharaohs used their supposed afterlife power as a political weapon. Successors built shrines promising eternal loyalty to their ancestors, not out of love, but self-preservation. If crops failed, priests blamed it on an offended royal spirit. If the Nile ran low, they said the gods were angry because a ritual for a dead pharaoh had been neglected. Divine vengeance became state policy, and sometimes the dead struck back, at least, according to those who lived to tell it. One letter from a priest in the 20th dynasty begs the High Court to fund repairs to the tomb of Ramesses II. "The spirit of the Great One is restless," it reads. "His statue sweats, his voice is heard in the dark." We can dismiss it as superstition, but to the Egyptians, this was administrative urgency. You didn't ignore a sweating god. The greatest irony, though, is how the pharaohs' obsession with being remembered created the very thing they feared. Their tombs, their statues, their inscriptions, all of it eventually drew the attention of grave robbers, conquerors, and archaeologists. Their names survived, but not the way they intended. Instead of being worshipped, they became museum exhibits. Immortality achieved, just not in the brand they ordered. Yet, the deeper you look, the more human it all feels. Beneath the gold masks and cosmic rhetoric, this fear of offense, of being forgotten, mocked, or misunderstood, was just a magnified version of what every human feels: the need to matter. The terror of disappearing. The pharaohs just had the resources to carve that anxiety into stone. When you walk through the ruins of Karnak or Luxor today, the hieroglyphs still shimmer faintly under the desert Sunday. Some of them are incomplete, half-erased names, unfinished cartouches. Maybe a sculptor died mid-stroke. Maybe someone ordered that name removed. Either way, the silence of those missing words feels louder than the ones that remain. There's a certain poetic justice in that. The greatest power in the ancient world could control armies, command priests, and bend entire civilizations to his will, but he couldn't control time, or people's memories, or the simple human urge to laugh at power. Somewhere, deep in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, a craftsman probably grinned as he drew a cat wearing a crown. And maybe, just maybe, that quiet act of mockery survived longer than any king's decree. Because in the end, Egypt's story isn't just about how to serve a god-king. It's about what happens when a society turns reverence into law, when obedience becomes the language of survival, when offending the wrong person becomes a cosmic crime. The pharaohs built eternity on those rules, and for a while, it worked. But eternity has a sense of humor. The sand still shifts around their tombs, swallowing and revealing them in endless cycles. Statues that once stared down empires now stare into empty air. And their names, carved to last forever, are spoken by people in languages they never imagined, across continents they never knew existed. The ultimate insult, perhaps, is that their immortality no longer belongs to them. So what was the stupidest thing you could do to offend a pharaoh? Not sneezing in a ceremony, not carving his name wrong, not even stealing from his tomb. The stupidest thing you could do was remind him even for a second that he was human. Because in ancient Egypt, that was the greatest blasphemy of all.